Do you think the authors named him Wick because that's all that's left after he snuffs everybody out? Like a candle? Like, huh? Huh? What's shakin' bacons? I'm sure you can tell by the title of this video that today we're going to talk about the man, the Baba, the Yaga himself, Mr. John Wick. This review is specifically for one of my supporting producers. If you are at least a night level supporter on Patreon or higher, you get to choose a movie for me to review, whether it is an older movie, a new movie coming out, doesn't matter. And this one is for RD Artuno, who chose John Wick Chapter 2, and I said, well, I can't do Chapter 2 without doing Chapter 1 as well, because I love them so much. This is like, I was stoked when I got this request from RD. This one's for you, RD Artuno. Thank you so much for being such a good supporter, for always giving me great ideas and feedback. I really value it, and I value all of my Patreon supporters so much. If you're interested, you should go support me on Patreon as well, and then if you're a night level or higher, I will do a movie for you. Now, I have a deep fondness for the John Wick films, and I hope that I can thoroughly explain why throughout the course of this review. And if you haven't seen the movies, I'm just gonna say it anyway. I'm going to be indiscriminately talking about spoilers, so please scooch along if you have not seen this movie, and then you can come back after you all excited because it's bitchin', and then you can watch the review, okay? But for now, you better scooch. As a side note, I did attempt to do like a John Wick like outfit, maybe, kinda. I don't know. John Wick is directed by Chad Stileski with an uncredited assist from David Leitch, which makes a lot of sense based on the fact that I'm going to argue later that this feels very much so like a video game, and David Leitch is known for attributing a lot of inspiration for his action films to video games. So in that regard, you can definitely see his touch on this film. And it was written by Derek Kolstad, which is very impressive to me because normally it takes like a full team of writers sometimes, even if it's a pair, to put together such a great story. And in this case, the story, which is so wonderful, was actually handled by Kolstad himself. And I just think that that is very impressive. He did an amazing job. If you have not seen of or heard of John Wick, I would be very surprised. Most people know of John Wick, if they haven't seen it, as that movie where the guy's dog gets killed and then he goes on a murderous rampage because of the doggo, the dead doggo. However, of course, the story as you dive into it is much more involved than that. We pick up on a man who has just suffered the loss of his very much so beloved wife. He receives this dog as a parting gift from her, and it is then subsequently killed, and his collectible antique Mustang is stolen by who turns out to be Russian mobsters after he refuses to sell them the vehicle. So he sets out on this mission, on this vendetta of revenge and vengeance to get back his car and to avenge the death of his animal. And it's very obviously a projection of his recent loss. And it's just a lot of anger and rage, and it's a good outlet for him to go and murder everyone. But the interesting facet is, of course, as we watch this man pursue and attempt his revenge on the Russian mobster who perpetrated this act, you get to see that this guy is not just a normal guy, and you start having this world drawn back. You get to see hints of this different underworld of crime and violence, and that you realize this man is not who he appears to be as he tears this mob apart single-handedly while indulging in gratuitous violence. And it is gratuitous because it's very gratifying to watch what many people would consider to be evil people in an evil lifestyle get punished. And revisiting this film, I am still just as impressed as I was the first time I saw this at how well of a job they did at not only selling this plot, but selling the story overall, which admittedly, for an action movie on paper, can look cliche. And they not only sold it well, but they did it with aplomb. Because they did such a good job with the story, let's talk about the story first. Again, on paper, this could have been any other action film, and it's not. And actually, I would argue that this is one of the best films, both story-wise, cinematically, lighting-wise, acting, that has come out in a very long time. And it's just an action movie. Action movies typically do not get the same level of respect as artsy indie house films do. And part of that is understandable. There are very many tropes that are adhered to in action movies. They can be a little predictable. You know, something bad happens, our anti-hero slash hero shows up, guns blazing, he's ready to take on the world, he's gonna take out the bad guys. This one, on paper, starts off as though it were doing the same thing. And as the movie progresses, almost right off the bat, you're introduced to the fact that this is not going to be what you think it is. Because John Wick as a character and the initial interaction with the horror and the violence that he experiences as his dog is killed and he is violently beaten by these people and his vehicle is stolen and his house is vandalized, that those people are not who they initially appeared to be either. And that's when you really start to understand that you are encountering a different breed of movie. They took what could have been something very normal and elevated it to a place where I think it shines like a candle. Just a few examples of why the writing is so well done. Other movies tend to rely on exposition to establish what's happening, to establish what things are going, to give you glimpses into the world that they could not figure out how to do visually. In this case, right off the bat, there's no need for exposition. You immediately know the story and the anguish of the title character, John Wick, is about his wife. He looks at her before appearing to die. As the story freaking opens, he just takes a simple look at a photo. There's no exposition. There's no need for him to explain, my wife died, I must avenge the doggo that I was given as a gift. There's no need for any of that. You know immediately some shit's happened. It's related to the death of his wife. He's avenging something from one simple scene. And there are so many wonderful visual hints that he has not over what has happened in the beginning. And I think this really further demonstrates the skill of the writing. As the dog is introduced, after you find out how deeply impacted the man is by the loss of his partner, the dog becomes almost a life preserver for him. The dog becomes a symbol of his wife's continuing presence in his life. That was the only thing keeping him above water and coping with his grief. And when that dog is lost, it's like he has lost the only line that he had connecting him with the world and connecting him to his sanity that existed outside of his grief. What's kind of funny too, you know that a movie is written well and directed well when a man's relationship with his dog is portrayed as deeper and more emotional than the relationships that some intended couples have on some movies. Like, you gotta give them major props for that. Those are just the initial scenes of the film that really demonstrate how strong the writing is. And as the film continues, you start diving more into the action and you realize, again, not through any exposition or background right away, that this man is definitely not who he says he is. It's revealed throughout the story how unique and interesting the characters are, and nothing is ever as it seems. And the prevalent message of the John Wick films is your past will come back to haunt you. And in this case, it is John Wick coming back to haunt this family. You have Vigo and his son Yosef. Yosef is the one who killed the dog, took the car, doesn't understand what he's done. He's a spoiled little brat. And of course, he's played by Alfie Allen, aka Theon from Game of Thrones, because apparently that's the kind of character Alfie Allen plays. Even the fight scenes are thought out to really add more depth to the character. And what's interesting is, as the film evolves, no information is explicitly given to the audience other than by sheer cinematography, except for a brief background of why the Russian mob family is so afraid of John Wick. What's great about this film is that it doesn't just adhere to standard tropes. I feel as though every action movie has some sort of party or club scene. So does John Wick. And as soon as it starts, my initial thought is, great, here's the typical party club scene. They have to have some kind of sex in there somewhere. But no, there's actually a twist on it. It's to show him how ruthless he is. It's to play with the lighting. It's to really hammer home the sheer fact that Wick can get to you no matter where you are, no matter how many people there are, no matter how many precautions you think you've made. He will be there and he's coming for you. And it's the same when he gets captured. You don't think, at least I didn't think, that he would actually be captured. And And he is. You see this crack in his personality where that veneer, that unspeaking, terrifying mask that he wears as an assassin slips. And you see just the raw, brutal nature of who this man really is coming out as he just roars at Vigo. Another thing that I really love about this story too, and that I love about the character of John Wick that is not, again, typical, is he just kills without preamble. There is no holds barred. He is ruthless. He is efficient with his fighting style. There is not a single move wasted. And when Yosef tries to plead for his life at the end, there's no grand speech. There's no posturing. He just walks up, doesn't even pause. Blam! Guy's done. And I love that. In a normal action movie where that would be like the end of it all, it's the conclusion, he's finally taken his revenge, you thought it was done, but it ain't, because it's time for more adventure. They done killed Marcus. That's why. It's just so interesting that the movie doesn't have a predictable point in it. That is something, particularly for an action movie, that I have to give sound credit to. And I mean, in this film, he just looks like the freaking angel of death, especially in that scene with Yosef when he offs him. He just walks up and his coat is flapping and you just know he's bringing death to you. And it's just so chilling in a good way to witness. I love it. I have to say, I gotta give this film huge credit for executing, pun intended, one of the top most satisfying movie deaths of all time, which is, well, first, why don't you guys guess? Tell me what you thought was the most satisfying death in this film. I'll give you a second. Just, what do you think was the most satisfying death? For me, honestly, top satisfying movie deaths of all time, it's on the list. Perkins getting killed for violating the rules of the Continental. It was so good. Although there are some things that don't make sense about that to me, and we can talk about that. You know, I don't have a lot of issues with the story because I do think it was such an original spin on established, predictable tropes for an action movie that I'm just very impressed. There are a couple things that are inconsistent, like, but they're like nitpicky things, right? Like during the club scene, how did Yosef run through the whole freaking club from the pleasure pools he was in all the way through the crowd of people, not once losing a towel? How did that kid book it for his life and not lose the towel? I'm just saying. I can't buy into it. And the other big question I have related to the most satisfying death is Perkins. Assuming Perkins was aware of the rule for disobeying Continental no-death policy, just because everyone was aware of it, it's commonly known in their circles, and she knew she'd be hunted down, why did she then answer the phone call and go to her death knowing that it would be coming? Another thing that I had an issue with, just in terms of inconsistency and just a slight bit of predictability, is that the new dog at the end, part of me liked that he got another dog. But then as you start the second film, the dog really doesn't factor in at all, and it felt tacked on to me, and I disagreed with the inclusion of that element at the end of the film. But the ending overall, I did think was superb. It almost ends in a draw of sorts where you have two men who are at the peak of their careers in different ways, even though John's technically retired, facing off against each other, and it's not immediately apparent that he's actually killed Vigo. And you can't have a well-written movie without good acting. It can be written beautifully, but if the acting is not great, or vice versa, it's not going to end up being as good as it could have been. In this film, I think that I had maybe one quibble with one of the actors. Overall, everyone, including the backup cast, the supporting cast, even the people who were just extras in the background, just did such an amazing job. Keanu Reeves especially. I've admired Keanu Reeves for years as being an incredibly good actor, and it felt to me in this movie, with the emotion that he displayed despite the few actual lines that he had, it made me wonder if he was pulling from his past, because Keanu Reeves actually has a pretty tragic past, especially related to loved ones. If you guys don't know that, I'm not going to go into it here. I wondered, with the depth of emotion displayed here by him in a very impressive performance, if he was pulling on his own past to furnish the well-rounded performance that he was able to deliver. because he is very impressive in this movie. This is one of his best performances, I think. It's arguable that it is. And rewatching this film, I started laughing so hard seeing William Dafoe. William Dafoe just has the most psychotic looking face and expressions that I have ever seen on anyone. He's insane. And I saw him in this and I was like, oh my God, it's William Dafoe. Of course he's in this. I forgot. He's so freaking crazy. And he did such a good job as the supporting friend, Marcus, who double crosses Vigo. And hey, Alfie Allen, aka Theon, as Yosef. We already know he plays a spoiled, annoying little asshole very well thanks to Game of Thrones. He did a good job doing that in this one as well. I think that he doesn't actually get enough credit for how skilled he is, because it takes a lot out of a person to really show. I've talked about before, I think a mark of a good actor is when they can enter the role and become the character. And if they don't, you can see it in their eyes, because the eyes are the windows to the soul, right? So if they don't show what's going on back there, it's not going to come through. Or if they don't connect with the character, it's not going to come through. And when you're getting in touch with a raw, primal depiction of fear, or even just satisfying base urges like Yosef does in this film, that is something that you have to show throughout your performance in every facet. And Alfie Allen really did a great job of doing that. And I will say, I don't think he gets enough credit for the skill that he has in his acting. Now, the one issue that I had with the acting was Michael, I'm going to say his name wrong, I freaking know it, Michael Nyqvist. He plays Vigo. He was almost perfect. The one issue I had with him was in the beginning of the film. I feel as though, I don't know the order in which the scenes were shot, and I'm not going to pretend to you guys like I looked it up to really delve into this, but the beginning sequences in the film almost felt as though he played them a little too heavy-handedly. There was just a little too much melodrama that he brought. Especially when he says, he's the one you sent to kill the effing boogeyman. It was just I brought it on just a little bit too strong. It was just a little bit over the top. He was like the one that I just couldn't quite, but he really, like, as the story progresses, he became better. And he really fit into the role more solidly. And in some ways you can tell after John Wick kills everyone, all right, maybe he was being melodramatic for a reason. But I do think his performance, at least in the beginning of the film, was just a little bit too heavy-handed. Not just the story, not just the acting was amazing. The music was great. I think the soundtrack was so well thought out. It was tasteful. It underscored that this isn't just an action movie. It demonstrates the thought and the mental positioning of each character as their songs come on and play during certain moments. You don't need to know what the character is thinking via someone speaking or via exposition when the visuals and the music demonstrate it so well. And I think a very, very great example is the song by Marilyn Manson that plays, you know, we kill strangers so we don't kill the ones that we love. And it plays initially when Vigo is recruiting Marcus to hunt down John Wick. You're watching the scene and you're like, oh shoot, so this guy, Marcus, really is just an assassin. The song is just ironic because we thought they were friends. We thought Marcus was sort of a mentor character, and then he turns on him. And at the end, you realize that Marcus was double-crossing Vigo. And that song, which initially threw you off the scent of that kind of little twist, ended up being what was real and what was depicted inside the head of Marcus as he was listening to this pitch from the Russian mob boss. And I think it's just a really great example of how well a soundtrack, if you put thought into it, can complement the characters in your story, complement the writing in the story, and complement the overall themes of the story. And this really leads me to an explanation of why I think that this film overall is such an amazingly put together package. The cinematography, the lighting, the color schemes, the framing of different shots, the timing and the pacing of the film, all of these smaller details that most people wouldn't notice add up to make this film better than many of higher budgeted, higher visibility films that I have seen. The fight choreography was insanely impressive. I know they took influence from anime, from different kung fu and martial arts fight styles, and you can definitely see that. You do get video game vibes. Like, I actually yelled, "Boss fight!" when he was fighting the lieutenant inside the club. An example of what I'm talking about with the cinematography. One of the opening scenes when he's at the funeral, Marcus is watching him at the gravesite, and they just kind of pan through, and the lighting and the framing of the shot is so artistic and understated, and it immediately sets the tone and the vibe for the scene and for the movie, and they carry this throughout the film. They don't just abandon it. There's not just one or two shots that are just like very beautifully done, wonderful tableaus of the film. It continues. Another great example is the strobe lighting at the club when he's fighting his way to get to Yosef. The lighting and the EDM music that is playing work together with the framing and the angles of the shots to create something visually that is unlike many, many, many movies. I think that the director and the writer and the production value overall deserve huge kudos because they did more with this film than you see in most major blockbuster movies. To the point where I honestly, when I think about it, I actually can't think of a film that has impressed me more for sheerly looking at the cinematography and the lighting and the pacing by itself. I cannot think of something that has impressed me more. There's a few that come close, but none are recent movies. Even the subtitles looked like comic dialogue with different emphasis, and it really underscored the tone that they were going for. John Wick overall, John Wick Chapter 1 as it's now known, is just an amazing, amazing film. And for me, on my movie rating scale, it does have a few flaws, but it sits at a pretty damn good 93%. Now, John Wick 2, directed by, again, Chad Stahelski, also written by Derek Kolstad. There's no uncredited David Leitch this time, however. And it's good when you have that same team come forward because you know that they've already produced a very good film. Hopefully they'll deliver on the sequel, and for the most part they do deliver. In Chapter 2 of John Wick, the events set in motion by his initial revenge are coming around full circle to haunt him, as is the rest of his past. As I said earlier, this is a common theme with John Wick. The events of your past will come back to haunt you in the future. In John Wick Chapter 2, he has to assassinate a target in order to get back to his retirement, in order to pay back a favor that he owed for going into retirement in the first place. After he eliminates the target and he is double-crossed by the person who requested the assassination, he seeks revenge on the double-crosser. In doing so, this exposes us more to the world of the assassins, to more of the rules, more of the people, and we get to see more of John Wick himself and how far he will go to try and escape from that lifestyle. This film, I want to say I really enjoyed it. And I will say that. Did I enjoy it as much as the first film? No. This film fell slightly short for me in a couple areas that I found personally disappointing. The main issues that I had with the second film are that they took what worked so well for them in the first one, and in their eagerness to play up what worked well, they turned the dial to max. And in some ways this works, in a lot of ways I don't think it does, and I thought that it went a little overboard. The subtitles that I really liked in the first film were even more emphasized. Like, look, we've got really cool comic-y looking subtitles. I'm gonna shove it in your face. In the second film, because you liked it in the first one, it was much faster paced than the first. And I felt like they really opened up the character of John Wick in a way that they didn't do in the first one. The problem with that is I feel as though for the pacing and the tone set with both of these films, they did it too quickly. Wick is portrayed as acting emotionally, but plotting logically. And in this film, he's far more emotional overall, and you see that sort of logical side of him take a back seat. And I do feel, at least for me personally, it's to the detriment of the character. And in many ways, it almost seems as though he's gone soft in this film compared to the other film. He spares quite a few people. He spares the initial opening Russian mob boss, initially spared and let Gianna talk forever, unlike his character demonstrated in the first film with Yosef, with Vigo, with the other enemies that he went up against. And he even lets Cassian live, which is unusual, I feel, for John Wick's character compared to how he treats Santino and how he treated the characters in the previous film, like I already mentioned. There are, in addition to that, a couple inconsistencies. People loved the club scene in the first one, so in this one, they brought in the big party scene. Now, the problem that I have with the party scene is he's supposed to be a ghost assassin and people don't see him, just suddenly they're dead, right? So he ghosts in to kill Gianna, he lets her talk for 5 million years, at least it feels like it, and that scene, FYI, at least to me, is very cringy. her whole thing, it was just very cringy. I could not jive with that scene. For whatever reason, the tone felt off compared to the rest of the movie. So my question was, why didn't he just sneak back through the catacombs instead of causing a scene at this big party and just walking out into the open? If he's supposed to be such an assassin, why wouldn't he sneak out the way he snuck in, which was quietly, undetected? And it really felt as though the only reason this happened was because the director and the writer wanted to indulge in another very violent party scene. And it wasn't accomplished organically, and that I did not enjoy. The other thing that made no sense to me is, granted, I really enjoy the violence and the fights in these movies. I love them. I really, really do. However, they are fighting oftentimes in very public places, not places related to the mob or related to these people. Everyone around them basically never notices. Like, he staggers around covered in blood. They've got knives in some of these areas. People are openly attacking him in public. And yet, you mean to tell me nobody notices or freaks out and there's no police that come? It doesn't, you know, it's lacking the amount of realism that the first one gave to us. I think the only time that the background characters reacted was finally after they looked jaded the entire train fight scene between Cassian and John. The doors opened and they ran out. But that was it. Otherwise, you don't really see people noticing or paying attention to what's happening, even though it's very flagrant. And that just didn't quite sit well with me. Also, this isn't really related to everything, but if John is such a good assassin, why is he always getting hit by cars? The amount of vehicles this man is hit with in this movie, I kept yelling. Like, I was watching and I was like, again, John? Again? You got hit by another car. Bro! Why are you not looking out for this by now? One thing I do think that they did really well with the story in this one, aside from the couple of flaws and the little quibbles that I have with it, is that you see more of this world and it is so intriguing. You get to see more of these characters. You see more of the Continental Manager, and you realize how much power he actually has. You see the reigning circle of the people that operate this world beneath the world on which we exist, and the way that they explore this world of assassins and crime as it lives parallel to a normal person's world is just so intriguing, and you really get invested in what's happening. However, I have to say, I don't know what they're going to do with Chapter 3, because the way that they leave it, I mean, he can't just kill everybody.
There gotta be somebody needs some killing.
I'm sorry, Major. There's no one left. You've killed them all.
Winston comes to his aid, he gives him excommunicado, gives him a favor, but how is John possibly going to get out of this? I feel as though that they have set up this impossible situation for him, and we just had it argued to us throughout Chapter 2 that he's in an impossible situation. And he does manage to escape, but he just makes it harder on himself, right? So you can't keep attempting to top yourself with impossible situations, because at some point you're going to lose the investment of your audience out of the sheer ridiculous factor that you're going to hit at some point. I have some concerns about that as Chapter 3 is approaching, but with that being said, I have been continually happily surprised at the way that these films have been handled. And despite the issues that I have with the story in Chapter 2, I still really enjoyed the fight scenes. And part of me wonders if that's because I love gaming so much, because they feel like video games. You feel like you're encountering boss fights. You feel like he's accomplishing objectives. And even the party scene, it's like when you're playing a stealth game. You get spotted by somebody, and that's when you go, oh crap. Well, that's it. I guess I have to kill everyone now. And that's basically what happens with John Wick, even to the point where it has like ridiculous video game style deaths, like with the pencil thing that we heard so much about that we finally get to see. And there's even a scene where he literally shoots a guy's head off of his neck. It's absurd. There's never a dull moment in this movie, just like there's never a dull moment in the first movie. For me, just really emphasizes how well they did with the entertainment value. And the cinematography and the lighting, all of that from the first movie that I loved so much, does carry into the second movie. Every shot in this film looks as though it could be a painting, a work of art, whether it's modern or old. One thing I love about these films is that they don't dumb down what is happening for the audience. You have to figure it out yourself, and they give you so many visual, audible clues. It really comes through. And the acting, I think, as well carried over splendidly. The only issues I had with the acting were and don't hate me for this, I don't think Lawrence Fishburne was the best character to cast in that role. I really liked the concept of the hobo system being the eyes and ears of him and the pigeon thing, and I thought it was interesting, but something about Lawrence Fishburne in that role didn't ring true to me, and I do feel like they could have cast that better. Honestly, you know who I think would have done really well in that role is Giancarlo Esposito, who played Gustavo Fring in Breaking Bad. I think that he would have been sublime in that role. Nothing against Lawrence Fishburne. I just think it could have been better cast. The main issue that I had with the acting is Ruby Rose. I don't mind Ruby Rose. She's fine. What I don't like is that her character seemed pointless. I think she tried a little too hard. It seemed kind of forced, and her character overall seemed sort of pointless. It almost felt like she was just there to get a screen credit. That's what it really felt like to me. You know, I just didn't get what the real point was of that character to the story. And it's unusual because in John Wick, just about every character has a strong reason for being in the story, and hers just really didn't. They didn't technically show her dying in this movie, so part of me wonders if my questions about why the heck she's in there are going to be answered in the third one. But it's implied that she died. He pulls the knife out of her aorta, right? He doesn't leave her the same courtesy that he left Cassian, so I did not find her to be a fitting character in this film, and I didn't find her acting to be impressive either, and so for that I thought the acting was subpar. John Wick 2 is definitely a worthy sequel of the first film. However, for me it just doesn't shine quite as much as that one did, and that's pretty typical for sequels. Sequels sometimes just can't live up to the first one, and I think this one came pretty darn close, but it didn't quite attain the same level for me as the first did. Maybe that's because David Leitch wasn't somehow involved. I don't know what it was. However, I will say that this was still a damn good film. And if you haven't seen it yet, I don't know why you just spoiled it for yourself. First of all, I do think that you should watch it. And you should watch it back to back like I did, because you get a very, very strong picture of what's happening. For me, John Wick Chapter 2 gets an 86%. Not quite as good as the first, but still pretty damn good. And quite possibly, I think this might be one of my favorite action movies, if not the favorite. What do you guys think? Is this one of your favorite action movies? Does it make your top list? You should let me know. Tell me, what do you think about the choices made in the sequel versus the first one? And are you excited for Chapter 3? I am definitely excited for Chapter 3 to come out in May of 2019. Cannot wait. RD, this review was specifically for you. And hey, if anybody wants to have me review a movie of your choosing, make sure you sign up to support on Patreon. Help me grow the channel, join our community there. In the meantime, I hope you all have an amazing week and an amazing weekend, depending on what day you end up watching this. And if you haven't subscribed yet, why don't you hit subscribe? I'd really appreciate it. I hope you guys are doing splendidly, and I will catch you later.